Okay, so it's just after 9 o'clock, so we will start. So welcome everybody, and I am delighted to be here on behalf of the ScaleUp Group and to introduce our female leaders in Series A funding. So we've got a great agenda with two fantastic speakers. We've got Clare Elford, she's the CEO at Clue Computing, and Melanie Goward, the Investment Director at Maven Partners. We should be taking questions at the end, so please put your Q&As in the box, the Q&A box, and we'll cover those after we've spoken to after the speakers have spoken. Okay, next slide. So, a little bit about me. I'm Lisa Powis. I was the CEO of Fresh Insurance, and I was a founder. I sold my business in 2018, actually nearly 3 years ago, after 17 years. We had over 250 staff, and it was very successful. I'd like to think it was. We won numerous awards along the way, but faced many challenges. Some of those challenges were being a woman in a very male-dominated industry. In fact, it was very usual for me to attend an event when I literally was the only female in the room. That picture you see is me and my brother Mark. He was my business partner, and that's the day we sold the business 3 years ago. And you can see the big smiles on our faces because that's the day that the money dropped in our bank accounts. So what am I doing now? Well, I'm a mentor for the Acceleration Academy for startups. I'm a board advisor, I'm a chair, I'm an investor in several companies, and I'm head of Insuretech for the ScaleUp Group. I've also have a charity that I set up in 2016 called Painting Our World in Silver. We're dedicated to fight loneliness in the elder population. But we've been very busy this last 12 months or last 14 months. We've partnered with the Salvation Army and Age UK, and we have delivered over 10,000 craft care packs to seniors throughout the lockdown. It's been very rewarding and very well received to these most vulnerable and isolated people in our community. So that's about me. So I'm going to pass you over to John O'Connell. He's our executive chairman at the ScaleUp Group, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about the ScaleUp Group.
Thanks, Lisa. I know now how you feel as I'm the only male on the panel today. Delighted to be supporting yourselves. A little bit about ScaleUp Group, which I founded a little while ago. It consists of 28 members, all of whom are also shareholders, people like myself who've been through the journey and made the mistakes and survived and been successful. Of the 28, as you can see, 22 are former CEOs or C-suite leaders. And that knowledge and experience and connections is available to all of our clients on their journey. We really focus on Series A, which in our definition is £2 to £5 million, typically, although in fact the definition can get stretched either way. And as well as obtaining funds for our clients who are all high growth, in our definition, that's at least 30% compound and more likely 50% compound. We do personally invest alongside a fund. So we do more than just be a glorified dating agency, so to speak. Our support is in two parts. The next slide, please, Barbara. This just illustrates, I'm not expecting anyone to actually read the text here, but what we do is in two parts. Part A is helping our clients find the right amount of funding, not too much. I've seen problems with companies have raised too much too soon, and obviously not too little, otherwise you can't get going the way you want to. From the right source, on the right terms. There's three different criteria. And obviously today we wouldn't have invited Melanie of Maven if we didn't think she ticked all three boxes, and more of her later. As importantly, some might say, and frankly I would, is part B of what we do, which is actually to support yourselves as entrepreneurs in how to spend the money. What money itself, as we all know, doesn't do anything. It's what you do with it is so important. And asking an entrepreneur who's bootstrapped, for instance, for some considerable time, suddenly gets millions to spend, and quickly and wisely without help is quite a daunting task, and many entrepreneurs do trip over at this point in time to disappointment of themselves and their backers. So wherever we can, we try to help, and that's encapsulated in, amongst other things, our CEO forum, which meets regularly. We've had about 18 sessions since March of last year. It was born out of the COVID pandemic challenges. And these are subject matters ranging from options plans, how you pay sales people, structures of boards, etc., etc. And all of that is available to our clients free of charge once we're engaged with them. Next slide, please, Barbara. Now, one of the reasons we've been running these seminars, and this is the 5th or 6th one we've run, is because Series A, in my estimation, is the toughest hurdle for entrepreneurs raising cash. In fact, the amount of scrutiny which people like Melanie and others give you, just forewarning here, health warning here, is as tough as when I experienced when my company floated on AIM many years ago. So the stats on the left show you that those who, it's fairly easy to meet a fund. You know, the stat of 21 funds in January this year, which we did a survey of, says about 60% of entrepreneurs get to have a meeting. And frankly, that's a bit of a misleading stat, because how many entrepreneurs do we talk with who think, oh yeah, we've got it all in hand, you know, we've had lots of interest, and any day now we're going to get an offer. But the reality is the dropout rate is awful. You know, you can see this, the numbers here. And I have to say, again, Melanie accepted, of course, that many funds use these meetings for their own market research, actually finding out what's going on in the market. But very few, in fact, overall, it is about 1%, and actually I rounded it up from 0.8% of the companies they meet do they actually invest in. That's a diabolical stat, as you I'm sure all agree. So what happens, of course, the entrepreneur has to go around this journey of meeting lots of often unqualified funds. You know, there's a mismatch in terms of size of check, criteria, growth rates, blah, blah, blah. And I've very generously said that of the 146 deals done last year, they were part of the 1,000. Some funds see about 20 business plans a week, hence the 1,000, get the cash. I think that's actually an overestimate. Last year there were 106 deals done up to £10 million, by the way, and another 34, as you can see, of more than that, about 1.1 billion. There's no shortage of cash. It's getting the right cash on the right terms. And of course, the timing for yourselves is really key. I think I'm passing back to Barbara.
To me.
One thing I might like to say, Lisa, is that I think it's very timely of you to be running this when Puppy Gustafsson of Darktrace has led Darktrace to a stock market listing, and they listed at £1.7 billion. So if there's a role model for females out there, I would say Poppy is definitely one of those. Back to you, Lisa.
Thank you. So I've been looking at the stats actually over the last few days and seeing what's happening to the trend with females looking for finance and raising finance. So I start with quite a good number here, 93% increase in female-founded scale-ups, surpassing 10 million in revenue. Now, whilst less than 15% VC money goes to females and mixed gender founders, we've seen an upward trend. And in fact, this is quite a good stats here. So since 2015, there's been a very healthy 72% increase in finance raised by female-only founders compared to the preceding 5 years. And it's similar for mixed gender founders. There's been a 56% increase. So that's going in the right direction. This is a nice large number. 4.9 billion venture funding was raised by 800 female-founded startups globally in 2020. 10 female founders have joined the Unicorn board, and that's valuing obviously their businesses at over $1 billion. So that's thank you for John for what you said earlier about that the company too. In 2018, there was 154 scale-ups with at least one founder, a female founder. It's now up to 371. So that's a really big increase of over 50%. So it's definitely going in the right direction. Another stat that I found I thought was good because it was about productivity. Each female founder scale-up generates an average of 148,000 of turnover per employee. So that's quite impressive. But I think we probably all can agree that the increasing participation of women is leading to better balanced leadership teams. And I think we can definitely agree that, and we'll perhaps talk about that a bit later. And one last thing that I came across as well is the Rose Review. I think this is done by NatWest Bank. And they've said that the advancement of female entrepreneurs could be worth 250 billion to the UK economy. So ladies, we've got and gentlemen, of course, it's going in the right direction. So it's a perfect time to introduce our first speaker, is Clare Elford, CEO of Clue Computing. And first, Clare, welcome to the ScaleUp Group because you've recently signed with us. So that's great to have you on board. So I'll pass you over to Clare.
Thanks very much, Lisa. And yeah, thank you very much for having me. I'm really happy to have been invited here to talk. So yeah, I'm CEO of Clue. Me and my brother are co-owners of the business. Clue is a SaaS business. Barbara, if you could move to the next slide. So over the last 3 years, we've seen a 50% growth in revenue, and we have just over 70 organisations using our platform today, and we are at just over the 2 million ARR mark. Most of our customers are UK based, although we are seeing growth. We've got some North American customers now. We've got 2 customers in Asia, 2 customers in the Middle East. So we're definitely seeing a pipeline of more international growth. And we're just in the process of preparing for going out for Series A funding with the help of ScaleUp Group to really accelerate our growth. If you could move to the next slide, just a little bit about Clue. Probably the best way to explain what Clue does and how we contribute to the community is probably here, how it's used. So threats are definitely evolving. The amount of data and investigations is increasing. Many organisations are under a lot of scrutiny now that they weren't under previously, and investigators on the whole don't really have the right tools to keep up with this. I mean, Clue is used to gather evidence, spot connections in the data, record an investigator's activities, and then present a case file at the end. So you can see here it's used in a really diverse set of organisations in operating in lots of different environments. We have a background in policing. Our roots are in policing, but as you can see, we're finding that investigations are being managed by many different areas of society now. I'll just touch on a couple here. I mean, I talked about the background in policing. For those of you who have been watching Line of Duty, that's a great example of a police unit that would use Clue actually. So Clue is used today in those anti-corruption units to investigate links with serious and organised crime groups. And then a completely different world, you know, looking at animal welfare. So Clue is used, yes, by the RSPCA and a number of other organisations, the League Against Cruel Sports, and those organisations are investigating things like illegal puppy farming, dog fighting, the illegal sale of horse meat, and often, you know, these organisations are they're not the police, but often they are managing these investigations and need to hand over these cases to the police. So having a tool that is a credible tool used by law enforcement is really important. And I would touch on one more here. So Clue is also used in the Home Office for some really important work investigating modern slavery and human trafficking. And again, a common theme here, often these are criminal networks and gangs operating in these spaces. So that's where Clue is used. We're really proud of the work that we do. Some really interesting work that our investigators do. So moving on to the next slide, please. Just a little bit about my background, and then I'll move on to talk more generally about females in the technology space, female leaders in technology, and then talk about Series A funding. I ended up here a little bit unexpectedly. I did a French degree, so my plan wasn't to go into technology or software, although I would say I didn't particularly have a plan at that point. I came into run Clue 5 years ago, having spent more than a decade working within a software business, selling software to airlines. I've had a variety of roles, so I've had roles including sales support, account management, sales. I'm not a coder, but I think I've been involved in a lot of aspects of the software build process, so solution design and technical design. Have to say, I've always worked in a mostly male environment. That's definitely certainly in the early years. We sold our airline software business to a much bigger Canadian company, and when we moved into that environment, I inherited an all-male sales team. I reported up into an all-male board, and most of the company were male. So I have to say I didn't give it a huge amount of thought in the early days. I didn't consciously consider, that situation where I was one of very, very few females in that space. And I have to say, I do think about it a lot more now. I think about gender balance a lot more, and I do think things are changing. So if we can go to the next slide. So looking more widely of sort of the view of females in technology, I think the culture has changed from my point of view, from what I've seen in the software industry over the past sort of 15 to 20 years. And I think probably in part due to more women being in this sector. I remember in the early days, the pressure to work late, to be seen to be in the office late, to be there at sort of 6, 7, 8 o'clock, and that was a real stamp of dedication. I think things thankfully have changed completely, certainly for us, and I know lots of organisations. We measure value in lots of different ways, and it isn't about working long hours, for sure. I think we have an agile software development team, and actually the wider organisation is quite involved in that agile approach. So we have Kanban boards. The teams meet every morning to review progress from the day before and the plan for the day. So output and value is measured by what is being delivered, essentially. So I think having more women in the organisation has definitely, from my point of view, contributed to that cultural shift. Where long hours don't necessarily, they're not necessarily that mark of dedication. And in fact, some of the most productive people on the team are people that have the reduced hours. So they're maybe working a shorter day, often because of childcare arrangements. And for them, I really admire a really focused and productive day, and no doubt a focused and productive time outside of work as well with the family. So for us now, we have more women in the organisation than ever. We, definitely recognise the benefits of having a more diverse team and a gender balanced team. And we're now starting to see, as a result of more females in the organisation, more females moving into leadership roles as well. I think there's lots of evidence out there to show that more gender balance and a greater proportion of women in leadership roles, those organisations perform better. I can definitely believe that. We're not quite 50-50, but we're definitely heading that way, which is great for us. It's so different from a number of years ago. We have different points of view, different ways of approaching things, and I think that mixed team approach is definitely beneficial for us in the work that we do. I think the other thing to say is that having a more gender balanced organisation and people seeing that does make us more attractive to female candidates. So, I've spoken to a number of women coming into Clue who have said that it has been quite, it's been a really positive thing for them to see that there's a female CEO at the company. And we do work hard to make sure that from a recruitment point of view, we're very clear with people that we have a family-friendly culture. We have a flexible approach to working hours. And I would say that even has changed even in the last 2 years. So 2 years ago, we didn't have really anyone on the team working part-time or reduced hours. And I think now, as a proportion, it's around 20% of the team are working some sort of reduced hours. And normally that is because of childcare arrangements outside of work. The final thing I would say is I think expectations are changing. So for us, we are we sell into lots of large organisations, government organisations. Often these are tender-driven procurement situations, and we are seeing much more emphasis now placed on diversity and inclusion, for sure. We can see it in the scoring, we can see it's part of the decision-making process. It's really quite transparent how important that is. So even though we're not a company large enough to need to report on that, we're finding that we're under more scrutiny because of the people that we're doing business with, which is great. Last slide. So just moving on to the question of females in Series A funding. I'll definitely hold my hands up. We're quite new to this, so we're definitely just starting the journey. I did have a think before coming, thinking about this session, whether our approach might have been a bit different to funding had we been more of a male-led organisation. And I think possibly that the answer might be yes. I think I know many male-led organisations who went out for funding earlier in the process. I think we could have done that. I think we could have taken a risk and we could have gone out for funding at an earlier stage in our sort of life cycle. But I think for us, and for me in particular, I think I've never had any doubt about the demand for Clue, but I think, knowing that the product, the technology, the infrastructure and our people were ready to scale was really, really important. I don't think we'd have wanted to come to the investment process not feeling prepared. And I wonder whether that is more of a female characteristic than a male. I don't know, and that would be interesting to hear from Melanie about her experience from a fund perspective. And I guess the final thing I would say is, we definitely recognise the need to have support through this process. So we're not the investment experts, we're not funding experts, we haven't done this before. We want to get it right, and that's why we're working with the ScaleUp Group to sort of guide us through the process. So not only having that expertise and experience to guide us through the process, but also I think the thing that set ScaleUp Group apart from other options is also what John was talking about earlier in terms of the ScaleUp Group membership. So having access to that network of entrepreneurs and all that knowledge and experience. I mean, you know, we'll take all the help we can get as we sort of embark on our next phase of growth. And I, you know, maybe that again is a slightly more female characteristic, that recognition that we want that support. So yeah, those are my reflections, and I'm going to hand over to Mel now. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Claire, and really interesting insights. First slide, please. So thank you very much, everyone, for inviting me to the ScaleUp Group and inviting me to speak today. My name is Melanie Goward, and I head up the ScaleUp investment team for Maven Capital Partners in the south of England, and also focus on tech investment across the UK for Maven. Next slide, please. I know the intention today is to try and get a bit of a broader Q&A discussion going, but I wanted to put up a few slides just to help inform and provide some understanding that hopefully knowing that many of the audience are likely founders and looking on some stage of their investment journey. I wanted to share some sort of useful information and thoughts that will hopefully be beneficial. So I'll talk a little bit about Maven and the funds we provide to scaling companies, and then a little bit about my experience of investing into female or mixed, more diverse gendered teams, and then finish off with a few bits of advice from my sort of personal perspective, thinking principally of female entrepreneurs, but probably it's likely relevant for all leaders of companies looking for scale-up investment. Next slide, please. So a little bit about Maven. Maven spun out from Aberdeen Asset Managers about 10 years ago. There's quite a heavy Scottish flavour in the business, but it's expanded to be an active UK investor based across the whole country. So we've got regional offices in nearly all of the sort of main geographic commercial centres across the UK. We've got quite a large and experienced deal team, so there's more than 90 of us, coming from a range of different industries and backgrounds, making and managing our investments across the UK. And as investors go, we are reasonably diverse. We're not quite at 50-50, but I did a quick tot up the other day, and I think we're about 45% female within Maven. There are a number of senior female investment directors and partners. There's probably a slightly greater proportion of men at the more junior and mid-level investment executive, so people perhaps aged between 25 to 35, that sort of stage of their careers. But I think we are, compared to other funds, I know, and I'll talk a little bit about that, quite a diverse organisation compared to some other places I've worked in the past. Maven, we manage a number of different funds. We included a £100 million MBO fund. We've got various debt funds for more established businesses, and a network of what we call our Maven investor partners. They're high net worths and family offices who tend to invest alongside Maven into more established MBOs, small mid-cap private equity opportunities. We also manage significant funds that are targeting scale-up businesses, and that'll be of principal interest to this audience. So I'll talk a little bit about those. Next slide, please. So our scale-up investment funds, of particular note are our 4 venture capital trusts or VCTs. These funds all tend to invest together in opportunities, and they can invest anywhere in the UK, typically providing a combined cheque of between 1 to 3 million at a first round investment. The funds are able to follow on, and on average, they're probably providing between 4 and 5 million per company over the lifetime of that investment. We're very happy to act as a lead investor. We can invest alone. We very often act as part of a syndicate, often as a lead of that syndicate. And we're a generalist fund. We don't specialise in any particular sector, but what we do like to do is back good management teams, particularly with experience of their industry and a clear view on how they're going to scale value in their business. We normally invest at circa Series A stage, and I know definitions vary. It's probably very similar to the ScaleUp Group definition. Companies that we invest in are typically revenue generating. They're not necessarily profitable, but they're looking to scale their activities and build value using the investment provided. We also manage a number of regional funds alongside the VCTs, particularly in the north of England. And those funds are often targeting, again, it's late seed Series A stage. Those funds invest between sort of 100k up to about 2 million. So they can co-invest with the VCTs, and sometimes they invest slightly earlier than those VCT funds as well. So there's a range of stages we can look at. So depending on where the business is based, and we've got a range of different client funds that could be used to provide support. So next slide, please. So given the topic, I thought a little bit about the experience of some of the companies that come to us looking for funding, as well as my own experience as a female investor. I think, as was mentioned earlier, in 2019, the government commissioned Alison Rose to lead an independent review of female entrepreneurship, and that led to the publication of the Rose Review in 2019. And that review found that funding is the #1 barrier for female entrepreneurs at every stage of their business journey. In general, women launch businesses with less capital than men on average. They're less aware of the different funding options open to them, and they're less willing to take on equity or debt funding. So one of the key recommendations of the Rose Review was to introduce an Investing in Women code, and that was launched in 2019 to help develop a better picture of the funding of female entrepreneurs across the financial services, and encourage signatories to that code to better support female entrepreneurs. That group has just published its first annual report based on 2020 data. But full disclaimer, Maven is not yet a signatory to this code. We're putting in place the different data measurement requirements across all the different funds that we manage that will allow us to provide the information that being a signatory of that code requires. But it is something that we're working towards, and I'm sort of taking a lead on our ESG panel to try and make that happen. But it's interesting because they split out venture capital data, which is that sort of scale up stage. And from the 40 signatories that are in the VC world in that code, it indicates still that female founders are substantially underrepresented. And from the data from those signatories, and remembering these are funds that they're not purely focused on supporting women, but they are recording the data and therefore are looking to support it. It's still only 10% of investment pitches that reach those signatory firms that are led by female teams. Mixed gender teams make up 24% of opportunities that get to pitching stage. And overall, only 6% of teams that receive funding are all female, 26% are mixed gender. And those female-led businesses are also slightly less likely to receive follow-on funding as well. And I think the other interesting thing I drew from that report is that networks and access are crucial. No matter what the founder team gender split is, teams that have a warm introduction to a VC firm are 7 times more likely to reach the investment committee stage than those that are a cold intro. Overall, across the industry, I guess I think it's believed that less than 1% of UK venture funding goes to all female teams, and just 4%, of overall deals. So it's a complex issue. I mean, clearly, from my perspective, management teams that are solely female or mixed teams only form a small part of our deal flow pipeline. And we can't, as a generalist fund, artificially increase the proportion of female-led teams within our portfolio if we aren't getting that proportion represented in the deal flow. But equally, I think that perceived bias isn't one that the industry can skirt. I think it's frequently mentioned by female entrepreneurs. They feel that they may be judged to be less competent than their male peers, and that might have an impact overall on female entrepreneurship, which was a concern of the Rose Review. So that perception of bias within the UK venture finance community is a concern. And I think part of the bias, that perception, stems from the underrepresentation of women on the investment side as well. So, only 13% of senior people on UK investment teams are women, and almost half of investment teams have no women whatsoever. I've mentioned sort of Maven's representation earlier. I remember I went on a dinner with another VC firm that we very regularly co-invest with, and they took our team, Maven's team, through a PowerPoint presentation covering their investment team. And they made a very specific point about how proud they were of the diversity of the team. And I kind of called it out actually, because the 40 odd sort of team members came up, and it was a very, from different backgrounds, quite diverse. But in those 40 photos, there was not a single woman. So it was only 50% diverse. And I just thought that was quite interesting that it hadn't even crossed their minds. That was the case. So Maven books a trend a little bit, but across the whole industry there's still progress to be made. However, I do think the situation is improving, and it's certainly better than when I started my own career about 20 odd years ago, and I certainly see more female peers and co-workers than when I started out. Next slide, please. So just to conclude, I wanted to think about what advice I might give to female entrepreneurs, and in some ways, it's the same as I would give to male leaders, but I, particularly sort of drawing out a few aspects. I think the first one was to use and develop your networks to research and reach out to potential investors. I think in some ways women have an advantage here, that fewer female entrepreneurs does mean that you are more likely to stand out in people's memories. I certainly notice it when it's a female entrepreneur, and I have a better memory of female leaders compared to the many male leaders that I've seen over my years of investment. And I think also with this focus on diversity at the moment, people may well be more willing to help. So I would use that advantage as much as I possibly could. I definitely make use of some of the female focused funding groups, and there are several out there. I've had direct dealings with Astia and Angel Academe, but there are others too, so it's worth researching those. And I think whilst some funds may, are not consciously biased, I think there is likely a lack of understanding and experience across particular sectors that female entrepreneurs are often involved with. I mean, some examples might be in female health or in the beauty industry, etc. These are very high level trends, but being clear about communicating the key data in your business, market figures, KPI, and communicating it in such a way that is familiar to investment funds, help investors understand those industries better. A male investment team probably doesn't have direct experience of investing in a female health business before, and so making sure that they understand it and can compare the KPIs across might be able to help. I think it also makes a big difference if you can include some successfully exited entrepreneurs as an advisor or backer of your venture. That statistic I mentioned earlier about greater chances of success coming via a warm introduction, it really relates to the sort of enhancements to the opportunity that are often made by the involvement of those kinds of introducers before the investor sees the improved proposition. So again, it leads back to making full use of your network and using it to its best effect. Just to finish, I think as greater focus is brought onto the sort of diversity issue, more and more VC firms like Maven are starting to record the relevant data, and we are starting to ask portfolio companies to do the same. Knowing that diverse teams perform better, and there's been plenty of studies that show that, I think it's starting to become more of a flag, if not a red flag. It's becoming more of a sort of concerning flag, that if a senior team is all male, all coming from the same sort of background, all sort of exhibiting the same kind of thought patterns, it becomes more of an investment risk. So I think the situation in terms of moving towards more diverse teams is improving. I've certainly seen it shift for the better during my career, and I would anticipate it goes on to improve further. So with that, I'll finish and look forward to further discussions. Thank you very much.
Okay, hi back. Thank you both, Melanie and Claire. That was very interesting. So we're going to move on to questions. So if anybody has got any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. I've got some questions that we've already had already. So my first question, which is I'm going to put to Claire, is have you faced any unconscious bias during your career?
Yeah, probably. I think definitely, I would say going into a pitch or a meeting or going to an event with male colleagues, I think it's very interesting that pre-introductions, I definitely get a sense that eye contact is going towards the male, the handshakes are going towards the male. And then, you know, once introductions are over and you know, roles are understood, the dynamic changes. So I think that initial impression, I definitely see that. I have to say, you know, working with male colleagues and customers, you know, once we get to the point where we're working together, I do feel well respected, and I, you know, I enjoy working on a sort of a mixed team. But I definitely think that initial impression, I see that a lot, and I think I also see it with other female colleagues in the organisation. I see, you know, I definitely think that they have to work hard to overcome some initial impressions, and I think that is often, you know, I think I would relate that back to their gender. So yeah, I think the answer is probably yes.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you actually. Being a CEO as well, I often would go into a room with a meeting, and immediately if there's men on my side of the table, they would immediately, the guys have a meeting, would talk to them before they talk to me, and it wasn't until introductions they've realised that my role. Yeah, it's I don't know, it's difficult to make that change, especially when you work in a very dominated industry, a male-dominated industry. I think it is quite difficult. Okay, I'm going to put a question to Melanie. You talked briefly about this, but the percentage of female-led business you invest in, and probably more, I think you did give some stats on that, but why? I mean, are you a real advocate of supporting women, and how can you make that, how can you change that or sort of improve that percentage of investing?
I've always been an advocate of sort of supporting diversity, actually. When I sort of, as my investment career has progressed, you know, a number of years ago, there was a focus about creating more diverse boards at a sort of blue chip, you know, large company level. And I sort of predicted or expected that would gradually filter down to the SME level, which it is now beginning to do. And we are beginning to see, you know, questions asked and focus put on and effort made to constructing much more diverse boards, which is great. I mean, in terms of sort of female-led businesses and women in senior roles in those management teams, I don't have exact numbers for Maven, but it's a low proportion, probably about circa 10%, I think, across our overall portfolio. The reason for that is because the female sort of led businesses form such a low proportion of our deal flow. So personally, I always sort of know I'll try and offer support where I can to female-led opportunities and to male-led opportunities, to be fair. But, you know, if there's feedback I can provide and signposting to alternatives, if an opportunity doesn't fit our particular fund criteria, I'll do that. I mean, where we have invested in female-led businesses, it's based on the business attributes plus the experience and what we think of as the potential of the management team. So there's no conscious discrimination against female-led businesses, but you know, we are working and, you know, by trying to sort of start measuring the stats and look at different ways to sort of support that grassroots entrepreneurship, looking to try and drive that female-led business be a greater proportion of our deal flow.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a question for Claire. Would you say that there's, and I'm probably I've done this in my past, being any unconscious bias to hire females rather than males if you're a female leader? And I know that I was did everything to promote women in my company. In fact, we had a 43% management, which I was, wasn't 50%, but it was pretty good in the senior roles, because I had that opportunity to do that. But also I was able to offer flexibility. But do you feel that is there unconscious bias from you?
Yeah,
to hire?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to rule that out for sure. I think I am we are as an organisation definitely very conscious of trying not to do that in any way. So not just on the gender issue, but I think I think we appreciate the need to really try to remove that unconscious bias during the recruitment process, because I think that is a very real danger, because we've talked a lot about diversity, and we've talked, I think Mel was saying as well, that having that mix and those different points of view and that balance, and not everyone thinking the same, is really important. So I think that goes here as well. So I think I've got to be really careful that I don't fall into that trap. But I have to say, we seeing more sort of female CVs and seeing really great female candidates coming through as a proportion is really good. I think that's the numbers are going up from us, and I think that is more because of the proportion of females going for the roles. But yeah, I know what you mean. I have to think long and hard about that one, but yeah, I think we would try to remove that unconscious bias if we possibly can.
Yeah. I mean, I know in my business I had a great manager, but she didn't want to work full time, and I had to persuade our managing director to let her work a 4-day week rather than a 5-day week, because she was fantastic at the job. But I was able to do that. But I think that's why having this diverse leadership teams can bring all these different points of view, which I think ultimately helps the business.
Yeah.
We've got a couple of questions. Actually, it's a good question that some of the audience have asked. It's a question for you, Melanie. And I'd be interested in this. What is the performance of female-led and mixed-led firms you have invested in compared to all-male businesses you invested in? I mean, do you have any data on that? But it'd be interesting to know, or a feel of that.
Yeah, it's. I think my personal experience. I mean, I have backed female leaders in the past. It's probably not enough numbers to sort of be able to sort of give a scientific answer to that. I think if I look at my experience over my career, when I first started, when I was more junior at the beginning of my career, working with more often all male SME boards and all male sort of senior management teams, I didn't really question it at the time, but looking back, I probably saw more evidence of things like groupthink, and perhaps some more short-termist tactical decisions that, looking back and with hindsight, perhaps more of a challenging board environment or more diverse board environment might have come out with with a different strategy. I think boards, as boards have become more diverse, in my experience, in more recent years, I think I'm seeing more examples of that sort of constructively challenging environment, different ideas and different thoughts, and perhaps improve strategies as a result. I mean, it's difficult to generalize, and I've seen fantastic female leaders, fantastic male leaders. I've also seen more examples of both. So, there's definitely no one size fits all here. But I do think, now seeing more diverse boards and more diverse senior teams, I do think that leads to better outcomes.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, actually, another question is just about, have you had, taking that what you've answered there, have you had situations where you're looking at somebody's come to you for investment and they don't have a strong, diverse team? Would you or would your colleagues call them out and say, look, you need a better D&I policy? What are you doing to improve that? I mean, you said it earlier that it was a flag that you could sometimes see. Are you not really raising it?
I think it's starting to be raised more now. Certainly, 20 years ago, if an all-male team came in with an investment proposition, I don't think anybody would have questioned it. It's the norm. Now, I think we are certainly, because it's been driven by a regulatory aspect, our investors have now got more in focus on ESG, and that filters down to us. That will filter down to our portfolio companies, because we are asking our portfolio companies to report on their diversity. So once they're in the portfolio, they know we're looking at it and we're reporting it back to our shareholders. I think as an investment decision stage, I think it is coming more to the fore, actually. I mean, particularly if it's an industry sector that requires an understanding of the client, and if diversity, if we see diversity will aid in that, if that management team isn't reflecting that requirement, then that would certainly be a red flag. I think even more broadly now, it's starting to be the case where, if it's a really obvious sort of, not necessarily even all male, but all sort of one particular background, or that danger of groupthink is certainly a question asked at investment stage now. And how are you going to expand your board? What gaps are there? What experience needs to be brought in? And I think that diverse question is at the forefront of it.
Yeah, and I like what you're saying about groupthink. I've not come across that word before, but I think actually diverse teams stop the groupthink, which is what you want, really. So
I think so, definitely. It's funny, I was talking to my husband about this, and he works for more of a blue chip organisation where they have got requirements on diversity at senior level, and he says it's really evident that the boards that have got those very diverse backgrounds really do think differently than that very sort of singular and focused and undiverse alternative, and leads to much better outcomes.
Yeah, good. And we've got another question from the audience. This is about how do you, and this could go to both of you actually, how do you feel about female specific support? So this person said that they found that some female founders don't like being identified as a female founder. But then there's obviously Madeleine Albright's comment about the need for women to support other women. So what do you think about that? Are you comfortable with giving out? Are you comfortable with saying, right, I'm a woman, I'm going to support other women in the workplace? Or how do you feel about that? And then I'll ask Claire, are you happy to answer that? Or
yeah, I mean, I'm all for it, I personally, but I think probably that might have changed over the course of sort of my career. I definitely am much more, I have much bigger appreciation for this now, because as much as we talk about the trends changing, women are in a minority, and I personally, I can think of a couple of female leaders who I've really looked up to, who have been real role models, and that has helped me massively. And I think that's really important for women to see other women in leadership roles, for other women to provide mentoring, and I know certainly for a couple of the women in our organisation, they do belong to groups that sort of provide support around that particular topic, and they find it really helpful. So I think I'm with Madeleine Albright here.
Yeah, Melanie, have you got anything to add?
No, I think I don't work for a sort of female focused fund, so investment decisions are taken on what potentially will make the best return, but as part of that, I think removing or seeking to level the playing field so that those opportunities that are female led or more diverse teams have the opportunity to deliver that better financial return. I'm absolutely all for that, and I think part of it is measuring it. You can't change anything unless you measure it, in my experience. So I think this greater focus on statistics and numbers in this field will drive change, and it will be change for the better, I think, because the studies show that the performance is improved by removing that sort of single line of thinking.
Good. We've had somebody's asked in the session if they wanted a bit more information on the Rose review. So are you able to Melanie, we'll be sending out to all the attendees some further information. So we will supply some more information about the Rose Review. Also, the ScaleUp Institute have done for the last 4 years, have issued a report about female entrepreneurs. Makes great reading. So we'll give details of that as well in our follow-up. Okay, just a question for Claire. So I'm going to ask a COVID question. I feel we need to. How has COVID challenged you in your role over the last year? And what potential changes has COVID been the catalyst for, particularly around flexible working arrangements for women?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I've got 2 children, so I've done the whole, you know, homeschooling thing. So that's obviously been a challenge, as it has for many others. I have to say, and I have to also mention that I've got a very, very supportive husband. He's very supportive of my career, which is, you know, massively helpful. But we have lots of people in the business who have families, and so the nice thing for us is that everyone, you know, most people were in the same boat. It was quite normal. And I think, you know, obviously the pandemic has been, you know, so challenging for so many, but I do think we're really fortunate in our business that I think we have seen some positives. So I think now, when I reflect, particularly over the last 12 months, particularly around recruitment, we have more females who have come to Clue with a fantastic, you know, really brilliant background and experience, but who I think probably wouldn't have applied for the role. You know, we may not have been able to consider for the role had it not been for the fact that we're much more flexible with working. We've got most of the team working remotely now. So I think because the expectations of our customers have changed, everything's online. So, you know, those important meetings that we always used to go to face to face, they're all online now. So I think that has opened up opportunity, certainly from my experience with recruiting female candidates. So we've now got a number of women who, you know, either working reduced hours or flexible hours in and around childcare, and it just works really well. So I think that's something that will, you know, that will live on post pandemic. So yeah, certainly a challenge in a lot of ways, but I think definitely we're seeing some real sort of benefits and some real changes to ways of working, which I think are benefiting the sort of female aspect of the business. Yeah.
Good. Well, that's good to hear. Now we're going to wrap up very shortly. Just got one last question for you, Melanie, and then but you're only going to have about a minute to answer this, a minute or 2 to answer. Just really interested in what sort of businesses, the difference between the male and female business that are approached. Do you find a big difference in types of businesses?
I think from my own personal experience, I've seen more female-led businesses in fields like female health, and perhaps a bit of a trend now for things in the sort of B2B sort of support industries like law or accountancy, because perhaps there's more senior experienced women in those fields than there were, you know, historically. Some fields like cybersecurity, maybe some aspects of data analysis and some types of fintech seem more male dominated. And again, I'm generalizing hugely, and you know, no stats to back this up, but I think it's maybe where that some of the perceptions arise around finance being more difficult to access for female entrepreneurs. Male investors have got sort of less experience of female health, for example, less experience of that market and the opportunities there. So it comes back to that point of sort of sorting out the KPIs in a format accessible and understandable and familiar, so that investors can understand the opportunities there, and balance them against, you know, the experience they've had perhaps in some of the more familiar industries. But it's yeah, you know, I think that point about mixed teams and getting experience from people in those industries and building the networks out to help give investors greater comfort is probably the best advice I can give for female entrepreneurs looking to raise money there. Good.
Okay, well, thank you, ladies. We're just literally move on to the last slide, actually. 1 second. So thank you, ladies. So what I can say is Series A is demanding. We think we can all agree with that, not for the faint-hearted, but with the relevant experience and guidance, the pain is less, and with a good positive outcome and a good ongoing network. But in terms of females, I think it is definitely encouraging, whilst the numbers are quite low in terms of the actual money you're giving out to VCs, but the trends are definitely going in the right direction, which is great news for us all. So thank you, Melanie and Claire and John as well for your input. That's 10 o'clock, wraps us up really. So just to finish off, we will be sending out a follow-up with any questions answered and the slides as well. So, and thank you for the great, we've had some great feedback throughout the session. So thank you all the people for the great feedback. Thank you.